So, Chapter 1154 of One Piece has officially leaked, kind of. At least a brief summary of Chapter 1154 has leaked, and well, it's kind of insane. And while we're not going to get into a ton of specifics about what happened in Chapter 1154, because quite frankly, I simply don't know them, there is a reveal at the end of this chapter that is truly game-changing to the entire story of One Piece. See, because while this chapter focuses mostly on the continuation of the backstory of King Harold, Hajrudin, and Loki, at the end of Chapter 1154, it is revealed that Roxy Xebec, the mysterious, silhouetted, incredibly powerful pirate that we've heard about for years now, had not only come to Elbaph about 50 years ago and was personally kind of close with King Harold, but was, or I guess still kind of is, much more importantly, Blackbeard's father. Yes, you heard me right, ladies and gentlemen. Blackbeard, one of the most enigmatic characters in the entirety of the One Piece universe, a former Whitebeard pirate warlord and now current emperor of the sea, draws his lineage back to one of the most famous pirates of all time. But what does this reveal tell us about Blackbeard? Does it give us a better look into what his motivations are? Does it explain why he wants to be royalty, battled against Shanks, betrayed Whitebeard? And wildly enough, does it explain the backstory of all four of the current emperors of the sea, Buggy very much included? Well, kind of, actually. So this reveal is not only monumental for Blackbeard fans, but it places the final piece in a very long puzzle in a lot of people's brains online. And thus this reveal has begun to unravel what a lot of people is going to be shown to us in the end of One Piece. So while the reveal itself is incredible, the possible implications of the reveal make it even better. And thus today I want to talk all about this reveal and its possible implications and answer all the questions lingering around it. Because today we're talking Blackbeard is Rox's son. But before we get to talking on paternity tests like an episode of Maori, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional Nick video a week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on to the Forest of Death. So, before we dive too deep into theorizing here, let's do a brief overview of what happens in Chapter 1154. Because, while yes, the reveal that Blackbeard is Rox's son is the biggest and most important thing that happens in this chapter, there's a couple of other important pieces of contextual information given to us in this chapter that help us build out theories regarding what this reveal could mean to the future of One Piece in this chapter. So for those of you who don't remember, because it was like 2 weeks ago, Chapter 1153 focused on Hajrudin and Loki's childhoods, but more specifically on King Harold about 150 years ago, and the two separate wives he had who were two separate mothers to Hajrudin and Loki, as they don't have the same mother. Now, as we learned, Estrid, who was the giant that King Harold was given to marry because she came from noble and pure blood, was the mother to Loki. However, after giving birth to Loki and seeing that he was born with horns, Estrid took Loki as a baby and cast him off the Sun World down to the Underworld. Now, Ida, who was cast down into the Underworld after being saved by King Harold and giving birth to Hajrudin, would kind of step up as Loki's mother, as Estrid completely denied that Loki was ever born in the first place. However, because Loki's existence had been denied by his mother, it was stated that everything bad that would happen to Elbaph after Loki's birth would be known as Loki's curse. And objectively, after Loki's birth in Chapter 1154, we do learn that things got pretty bad for Elbaph pretty quickly, as it was after Loki's birth that Charlotte Linlin, also known as Big Mom, would come to Elbaph as a child. And I don't know how many of you remember exactly how that went for Elbaph, but basically it led to Big Mom destroying a large swath of Elbaph. But the Big Mom incident, as it's referred to, wasn't the end of Elbaph's misfortunes, as after Big Mom destroyed a large part of Elbaph, it was struck with other maladies such as fires, storms, and famines, at least according to Chapter 1154. Now, mind you, all this happened while King Harold was out trying to interface with the world as an emissary for Elbaph. The Big Mom incident, the fires, the famines, the storms, the birth of Loki, the beginning of Loki's curse, all that. And according to Chapter 1154, one day when Ida and Hajrudin were cornered by some desperate giants trying to make ends meet in the Underworld, it wasn't until that moment that King Harold returned, just in time to protect Ida and his son Hajrudin, and just in time to turn around Elbaph from the brink of disaster. Now, with King Harold came foreign help, presumably from the world government, because because remember, Loki said that one of the things that he hated about King Harold was the fact that he was working openly with the world's government when Elbaph should be independent. Now, it's upon King Harold's return that we realize that Astrida, the pure-blooded and noble giant that King Harold had been betrothed to, and the mother of Loki, had died of an illness before King Harold was able to make it back. But the woman that King Harold was actually in love with, Ida, had opened a bar in the underworld and was living down there rather comfortably. Now, all of this is to set the stage for King Harold joining hands with the world's government, the beginning of the establishment of a two-way connection between Elbaph and the world government that made them a recognized kingdom, something that seemingly King Harold was probably forced into doing on account of the fact of how poorly things were going on Elbaph, presumably because of Loki's curse. But this right here is where things start to pertain to not only Blackbeard, but also Rox the Xebec. See, because King Harold had made this connection with the world government, apparently 56 years ago, he went to Reverie. But at Reverie, the world government simply ignored him. Now, rather interestingly, it's then stated that when King Harold got back from Reverie to Elbaph, he talked to Jarl, who's now known as Chief Jarl, about Galley Law. Now, apparently Galley Law was a group of ancient and non-ancient giant shipbuilders who were captured possibly by the government. Now, it's interesting for a numerous amount of reasons. One, it had already been established in the last couple of chapters that the entire world was behind and therefore curious about the shipbuilding and shipfaring of the giants, and therefore the idea that the government would try and steal all of the shipbuilding and shipfaring giants off Elbaph not only makes a lot of sense, but is also doubly suspicious when you consider the fact that the group of shipbuilders on Water 7, led by Iceberg, are called Galley the Company. And thus this chapter not only gave us the crazy reveal that Blackbeard is Rox's son, but also the possible idea that Galley the Company was inspired by and taught by ancient shipbuilding giants. And it's a possible explanation as to why Iceberg and the Galley Company had Pluton's blueprints, as it's believed that Pluton was actually created by this Galley Law Company of giants, and the blueprint was either stolen by or given to the people of Water 7. And like I said, this makes a fair amount of sense because the Pluton blueprint is known to be old, and the giants of Elbaph were considered the forerunners of all things ships prior to Vegapunk's rise to prominence. But that's for an entire another video. And just a fun little tidbit of information from 1154 that I thought you'd like to know. The real important information, at least so far as it has to do with Blackbeard and Rox, starts about 2/3 of the way through chapter 1154, where we pop into a time period 48 years before the current events of One Piece. See, because it was 48 years ago that Rox the Xebec showed up at Elbaph. And when Rox showed up at Elbaph, one of the first people that he interfaced with was Loki. And thus Rox asked Loki if this is Elbaph, and if it is, if King Harold is around. See, it's at this moment in time that it's revealed that Rox had actually met King Harold 8 years prior at the Reverie that King Harold had attended but been ignored at. Now, this is interesting because it raises the logical question of why was Rox at the Reverie? For those of you who don't remember, the Reverie is a meeting of the leaders of all of the countries that fall under the purview of the world's government. World leaders like Wapol, Cobra, and Poseidon all show up in Marijwa, talk about what's going on in their individual countries and how to make the world a hypothetically better place for everyone. Now, only two kinds of people are allowed to attend the Reverie: kings and their bodyguards. And thus, rather interestingly, for Rox to attend this kind of event, he would have to fall into one of those two categorizations, either a king or a bodyguard. And while a bodyguard is a definitive possibility, king is the exponentially more interesting and actually more likely possibility. See, because for Rox to be talking to King Harold in the first place, it would make sense that they were of equal status at the Reverie. Ties in the fact that if Rox was just a simple bodyguard, it would make what got him thrown out of the Reverie a bit more confusing. See, because apparently at the Reverie, Rox killed an admiral. Yes, an admiral, and therefore became a wanted man. Now, for those of you who don't remember how the Navy ranking system works, admirals are some of, if not the strongest members of the Navy. That's Kizaru, Akainu, Aokiji. People with power levels so incredibly high, they're able to go toe-to-toe with absolute legends like Whitebeard. And yet Rox was able to kill one of them, telling us that even a long time ago, before Rox was a pirate, he was an insanely strong person, which lays to rest the rather popular idea that Rox was in a somewhat Buggy-esque situation, that he himself wasn't actually all that strong, and the reason that his pirate crew was so incredibly legendary was because of the cast and crew he had around him. But the fact that Rox was able to kill an admiral before he even became a pirate seems to imply that he had every right being the captain of his insanely packed pirate crew. And after it gets revealed why Rox was thrown out of his potentially royal role as a possible king to a nation invited to the reverie by the world's government, it's at that point and that point alone that we finally see Rox the Xebec's face. And he has two-toned hair and a face that is eerily similar to that of Blackbeard's, and well, that's because he's Blackbeard's father. But what does all of this mean for the future of One Piece? Well, it may seem like on the surface level, this is just a crazy reveal about one of, if not the main antagonist of this story, being the son of one of the main antagonists of times past. This one detail answers so many hypothetical questions we've had throughout the duration of One Piece, most of which revolve around Blackbeard's motivations. See, obviously, Rox is no longer around, and therefore a lot of people theorize that Rox died on God Valley. I mean, after all, we know the key players that were present on God Valley: Garp and the Navy, the Rogers Pirates, the Rox Pirates, and people like Figurlin Garling. And while we don't necessarily have any true way to know whether or not Rox did die on God Valley, if he did die on God Valley, then it's safe to assume one of the other key players on the island had something to do with it. Now, whether that's Whitebeard, Garp, Roger, or even Figurlin Garling, we can't say. However, many people do speculate that Whitebeard was actually responsible for the killing of Rox, maybe when he identified that the Rox Pirates didn't stand a chance against the combined forces of Garp and Roger. And thus, this is why Roger and Whitebeard seem to have a somewhat friendly relationship, even though they were always squabbling. But like I said, all we really know is that Rox the Xebec died during the God Valley incident when Garp and Rogers teamed up against him. Or at least that's what we've been told. You never really know with One Piece. But if Garp, Rogers, possibly Whitebeard, and Figurlin Garling were responsible for the defeat of Rox, then how Blackbeard has moved in One Piece's story makes a lot more sense, especially if we consider the fact that Blackbeard is moving with malicious intent against those who took his father from him. See, Blackbeard is 40 years old. The God Valley incident was 38 years ago, and therefore now that we know that Blackbeard is Rock's son, this means that Blackbeard was stripped of his father when he was only 2 years old. And if we look through the entirety of Blackbeard's story through the lens of revenge, everything he's done makes a fair amount of sense. He joined the Whitebeard Pirates so he could get his hands on an incredibly powerful devil fruit, the Yami Yami no Mi, and then use the power of that devil fruit to betray the Whitebeard Pirates, possibly in a fit of revenge against Whitebeard, who allowed for his father to be killed in the God Valley incident. But it goes further than this. See, because after Blackbeard abandons the Whitebeard Pirates, who goes after him other than Goldie Roger's son, Ace. And after Blackbeard defeats Ace, he turns him into the world government to be executed in front of the Whitebeard Pirates, understanding that Whitebeard would show up to try and save Ace, so that when Whitebeard died, he'd be able to steal the Gura Gura no Mi from him. But Blackbeard wasn't done there, as also after getting his grubby little paws on Kobe, he held Kobe hostage and said that the only way that he would ever release Kobe is if Garp switched places with him. And thus Blackbeard seems to be checking off the names of people, or at least the names of people related to the people responsible for Rox's death, and making sure that he's able to destroy their lives in the way that they destroyed his. And here's the thing, we know pretty concretely that Blackbeard knows that Rox is his father. I mean, he calls his ship Xebec's Saber. But is he doing all this because he's simply pissed people killed his father, or is there something more to it? And well, to elaborate on that, we have to focus on the fact that for some reason, Rox was at the reverie. And the answer that a lot of people are scrambling to online is that maybe Rox was a king. But a king of what? And like with all things anime, people are once again split between two possible answers. See, some people believe that Rox, and therefore by extension Blackbeard, were the original royal family of Drum Island. And Wapol, who's either connected to Rox and Blackbeard through some kind of familial connection, or simply by seizing the opportunity of Rox's death, well, I guess his parents would have had to seize the opportunity of Rox's death because he's only 29 pre-time skip, were able to instill themselves in power as the leaders of Drum Island. Now, the reasoning for this is a little shaky, but some state that in terms of appearance, Wapol does look a bit like Blackbeard, that him and Blackbeard were introduced at the same time, and that really the first thing that we ever see the Blackbeard Pirates do is attack the Drum Kingdom, at which point Wapol flees the country. Ties into the fact that Wapol is currently shacked up with Vivi in Morgan's flying ship because of the fact that he saw Emu and the Five Elders kill King Cobra, and consider Vivi's possible connection to Emu, who may be Nefertari Lily, and Wapol seems posed in the next couple of arcs to take a big important step into some kind of role that we didn't originally see for him, and that possible role could be his connection to Blackbeard. However, the other explanation as to how Rox the Xebec possibly could have been royalty is simply that at one point prior to Rock's killing an admiral is that Hachinasu, aka Blackbeard's current island, was an incorporated country that existed under the world's government. However, after Rox, the presumed king of this country, killed an admiral, not only was his role as king of this island stripped away from him, but because of the gravity of his sin, the country was no longer acknowledged by the world's government, which allowed for it to descend into its lawless current state, now known as Pirate Island. But in either of these scenarios, the important takeaway is Blackbeard is a prince, or should have been a prince. And thus this completely unlocks why Blackbeard is so obsessed with the concept of becoming royalty, because he's trying to claw back at what he believes was his birthright. And here's the thing, within the confines of the One Piece universe, this isn't a crazy thing for Blackbeard to do. See, Blackbeard over his 40 years on Earth has seen people like Wapol, Doflamingo Don Quixote, and even Judge, the former king of Kuma's kingdom, given all the resources they could ever possibly want by the world's government to either expand their kingdoms or take back their kingdoms. And thus Blackbeard trying to do whatever he possibly can to win his kingdom back and be reinstated as royalty is not only not unheard of, but also very closely mirrors Don Quixote Doflamingo's story, as Dofi was trying to do basically anything he could to be reinstated as a celestial dragon, an honor he lost as a child. But what's even crazier about all of this is that this now means that 3 out of the 4 current emperors of the sea all tie their roots back to incredibly important movers and shakers of the previous generations. Shanks is the son of Figurlin Garling, former head of the Holy Knights and currently one of the 5 elders. Luffy is the son of Dragon, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and Blackbeard is the son of Roxy Xebec, one of the greatest pirates of all time. But with 3 out of the 4 emperors all having insanely impressive fathers, it kind of makes you wonder where the 4th emperor might have come from. And who is the 4th emperor, you ask? Well, none other than Buggy. Now listen, a lot of Buggy's backstory is actually kind of a mystery. All we know is that Buggy, by the time that he was 9 years old, was with the Rogers Pirates. But as to how he ended up with Goldie Roger, we don't actually know. We understand that Shanks was left on God Valley and adopted by the Rogers Pirates, but we don't have that same backstory for Buggy. It ties into the fact that there was a theory out there that Dragon was actually present for the God Valley incident, as at the time of the God Valley incident 38 years ago, Dragon would have been 17, and we do know that Dragon was at least briefly in the Marines, and the idea that Dragon was serving on the same crew as his father, Garp, was sent out alongside his father to the God Valley incident, where he saw the true cruelty of the government that he was serving, and therefore after that moment decided to quit the Marines and start the Revolutionary Army actually makes a fair amount of sense. But if Figurlin Garling, Rox, and Dragon were all present at the God Valley's incident, this kind of trend would make you believe that Buggy's father was also there, or at least one of Buggy's parents. And as Buggy also ended up with the Rogers Pirates in a situation that appears to be somewhat similar to that of Shanks's, not only could one of Buggy's parents been a major player at the God Valley incident, but it's also an okay to solid possibility that Buggy was also left behind after this incident. And considering the fact that Buggy has very iconic blue hair that can really only be compared to that of Vivi's, it's just another piece in the absolutely massive puzzle that is trying to figure out as to how or why Buggy may be related to Emu, who many believe to be Nefertari Lily. But that is also an entire separate video. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. What do you think the reveal that Rox is Blackbeard's father truly means for the One Piece universe? Let me know in the comments below. And Dwight, because you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Man, I can't believe it took me this long to get into One Piece theories. This is exhilarating.